Welcome to Interview with the Gunmaker number 9. Today we're talking to Ian Clarke, whose association with a number of different London gun-making companies is perhaps not well known to a lot of our overseas viewers, but is well known within the gun trade. So Ian, thanks for joining us. It's very nice to have you here.
No problem, Diggory.
So you're quite integral in the gun trade these days, but just cast your mind back to where it all started. How did you get involved?
In the gun trade, I was working on an industrial estate for a small engineering company that was doing motor racing parts predominantly, and was very interesting. And there was a chap opposite in a unit that was making gun parts, and we used to talk to him, and we were generally interested, but I wasn't interested in guns at that time at all. And we just found the guy interesting, and he was talking about what he was doing, and he had some pretty good machinery, some fairly up-to-date machinery. This is going back to late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
So it was, machinery then was different to how it is now. And it was pretty impressive machinery. So we'd go over there and we'd look at the machines, and then of course you start looking at what he's doing on it. And he's making parts for guns and lock work and stuff like that. I found it really, really interesting.
Now you say it was impressive machinery. What kind of machinery was that?
Well, it was wire erosion and CNC milling. Well, CNC milling I'd seen before because I did my apprenticeship in the aircraft industry. So I'd grown up around these sort of machines. But wire erosion, I'd never seen wire erosion before. And so you've got a machine with a reel of brass wire that's going through a series of rollers, and there's an electrical current passed through it, and there's water in a tank, and you think, well, what's all that about? Water and electricity. But he's cutting out these really complex shapes, and you're thinking like, wow. And the accuracy was, tenths of a thou, so it's like, wow, this is really impressive. And so we created this sort of relationship and used to speak and etc. And then I got made redundant from the motor racing place and was actually out of work for a couple of weeks. And then all of a sudden, I got a phone call from John Shirley, who was the guy that was working opposite. And he said, have you got any work? And I said, well, no, not really, because there was a bit of a recession going on, early 90s. And he said, do you want to come and work for me? So I sort of thought, well, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And I said, well, I don't know anything about the machinery. And he said, well, don't worry, I'll train you up. So I duly started to work for him, and it was really interesting. I mean, and John sent me on the relative courses and gave me the opportunity to train myself on the machines, which I really enjoyed because obviously I was, young, so I was very keen to learn. And we started, we were making gun parts, and I didn't really know what parts they were. I just knew that we were making bits for locks and mechanisms and stuff like that, and I found it really interesting and really got involved with it. And John was great for that because he just let you get on with it. He was good at the design side of things, so he'd do a sketch, a 3D sketch, and say, this is what we want to make. So there was CAD CAM. I'd never seen CAD CAM, so I started on that and drew things up, and then I was programming, and yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I really got stuck into it. And of course, John was doing work for a lot of the trade. So he was doing work for Holland and Holland. He was working for David Mackay-Brown. We were working for Peter Nelson on his over and under boss stuff. And I got to work to meet these guys and work with them. So it was a fantastic opportunity. But I think it was of its time. It was an opportunity at that time. Yeah. Was quite about. David Mackay-Brown was really starting to get going on his projects, his over and under, and we were involved with that. And Peter Nelson was doing his boss over and under, and we were doing the parts for that. I got to meet the barrel makers, the stockers, people like Derek Mills and people like that. And so they were coming in and talking to me, and I was just learning all the time. I was just,
And what sort of things were they saying to you that was leading you to adapt this and change the things that you were producing?
Well, when you were talking to the action filers and they were sort of saying, so you were saying, well, what do you do now? So we'd machine the action, we'd machine the barrels, and then they were saying, right, we do this, and then we chisel the metal. And you're thinking, chisel the metal? It's all a little bit archaic, you know. And I'd sort of say to them, well, what could we do that would make things better? What could we do to make things faster and to help you guys out? And so it was things like better finishes on the spark erosion. And it was stuff like 3D shaping that we started to do. Basically taking a lot of the grunt work out of what they were doing. And of course, you know, you got to talk to the guys. So you talk to Peter Nelson, you talk to Derek Mills, the stocker. What did he want? So maybe he wanted better snap work and stuff. And angles on we were doing bolt rifle stuff as well. So draft angles machined on, so he didn't have to file it in. And it was really good because they'd come in and then they take the parts and then they'd come back about a month later and give you feedback. You know, so that really worked well, Ian, or that was an absolute nightmare. Don't do that again. And John let me do it.
You were producing at the time. How reactive could you be when somebody came back in and said, you've been making these widgets for me, whatever part of the gun it might have been, you know, I need it to be different in this way. How quickly and economically could you go back to the drawing board and make those adjustments?
No, it was quite easy really with the CAD. I mean, we were only working on 2D CAD at that time, so it was almost like just a pencil drawing but on a computer. Now, obviously, we've got 3D CAD, etc., but we had 2D CAD. It was quite straightforward, and the machinery was, it was all computer controlled, but it was a lot different to what we've got now. So it was quite easy to do. And again, John Shirley was very proactive with that. He wanted to really push these parts forward, and anything that he could do to make it better he wanted it done. So, and when we bought more machinery, John bought the first CNC spark erosion machine I'd ever seen. And then sent me on the course and I learned how to use it. And we were doing, you know, better cavities, so the accuracy was going up all the time. It was a really interesting time, and it kind of gave me a good introduction to the gun trade, which I loved. I mean, I just found it fascinating.
And did you find that the gun trade was immediately open to these new developments and were welcoming of what you could do?
I think the honest answer is yes, they were. You always had the odd people that were, you may call them dinosaurs, but they had their ways of doing things and they didn't really want to change. But on the whole, people could see the benefits of what we were doing. Certainly somebody like David Mackay-Brown, a very forward-thinking guy. He wanted this stuff and he wanted lots of it. He didn't want to be, you know, waiting a long time for 2 or 3 of this. He wanted 10 of these, 10 of them. And so we had to come up with ways to make it. And that's what we did. And then the skill, I suppose, that we learned was how much metal to leave on, in what places, to make the, what is in effect still a bespoke gun. It always has been, it always is now. So that the guys are filing bits off, but they're only regulating one surface, whereas before they'd have been filing bits off everywhere. And I don't believe anybody really wants to do a lot of that hard graft, especially if they're building more than one gun. I mean, you know, some of these customers were building, you know, 5 off, 6 off, 7 off guns. You know, they were in a sort of a production environment, you know.
Yeah, so that was then. Have you been involved with the progression of that right the way through from that period up till now?
Yeah, I mean, being basically the story as it goes is I stayed with John for about 4 or 5 years, say 5 years, something like that. And then I got a phone call from Holland and Holland, and they said, would I like to would I like to go up there? So I went to Holland and Holland, and of course they were doing some really interesting things at the time. And for me, it was fascinating to be in a proper gun factory. I mean, a
And when was
purpose-built.
this? This was mid-80s, late 80s?
No, this is early 90s, mid 90s. That is.
Okay.
So they'd invested in CNC machinery. They'd had the factory all done up. I mean, it was a beautiful factory. It still is now. Purpose-made gun factory. And what fascinated me was the fact that you had the machine shop on the bottom floor, then you had the offices on the first floor, and then you had the actioners, engravers, and as it went up, the guns got finished. And so you could walk round and chat to people who were working on your stuff, but the gun was finished. So I found that fascinating. And we were doing things, we were meddling with high-speed machining, so there was lots to learn. I mean, and Holland had got a lot more money behind them at that point than, say, I had with John Shirley. So that taught me lots. And, of course, you're meeting more people all the time. You're looking at some things and you're thinking, that's a great idea. I love the way that's being done. And then you're looking at other things and you're thinking, oh, I don't really like that so much. So you took from it what you wanted. So I stayed there a couple of years.
So how was it when you went in there as the new boy with all your new wizard machinery?
In Holland and Holland,
they already had take to that.
Yeah, they already had CNC machinery, and I think people like Peter Boxall, who was there at the time, Peter Blythe, they were very forward-thinking people. They wanted to go down this CNC route, and I was, dead keen to bring along the little bit that I'd learned, and sort of throw that into the ether, which I did. And it was really a fascinating time. Again, you saw the guns. I mean, Holland and Holland, fantastic big rifles being. I remember them doing the big 700 double, which was, we went down the shooting grounds and shot that, and it's just like I was just in awe of it, really, and it just gave you more and more a want to learn more.
And how, if you can quantify it, how much faster or how many man hours did you feel that you were able to take out of the process by taking a lot of the heavy filing work out and producing parts at that time?
Oh, at that time you were taking maybe 50, 60 hours off action in time, stuff like that. I mean, I don't think you were halving the times, but you were certainly making a big chunk in them. When they used, at that time, they were still drifting bolt slots out. So you can imagine how much work that would have been. And then we were not only sparking the bolt slots in, but we were getting a good surface finish, and then we were making the corresponding part, and it was nearly going in. So there was a lot of savings in time, and of course they could deal with Holland and Holland were just doing their sporter at that time. So when I went there, I think we were making half of the production was the new sporter. Again, so it's like another aspect. You really were helping to try and get that push forward and get it made quicker. And it was good at Holland and Holland. It was a good. It moved on from my work at John Shirley really nicely. It gave me more experience. I liked it at Holland and Holland. I would have stayed there longer as well, but it was only that I got a phone call from Purdey's at that time, and they were going down the same road that Holland and Holland were going down, and they just said to me, they wanted somebody to come run the machine shop at Purdey's. And I liked it at Holland's, but it was a really good opportunity at Purdey's. They hadn't got anything. They hadn't got machinery running. So it was an opportunity to go and really start something from the ground up with what I'd learned over the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
So I sort of ended it at Holland's, and so I was sad to leave. It was a great place to work, and I really respected the guys down there and what they were doing. And then that opened up a whole new challenge at Purdey's.
So how did moving to Purdey's and setting up compare with your experience at Holland when you'd gone there?
Well, I was quite surprised at how things were at Purdey's. I mean, it was a lot more. Probably they were making guns the way they'd made them for the past 30 or 40 years. I mean, it was quite antiquated, really. And there was some CNC machinery there, and they needed somebody to come and kind of organise it all. They'd got no drawings, just sketches of what they'd done in the past. And Nigel Beaumont had got this vision of CNC machining and basically getting it all on the CAD and just taking Purdey's that stage. They rebooked out Vendôme and Richemont Group. So they wanted to move things forward. But I don't really think that they understood what they had to do to move it forward. So I mean, basically, they've got nobody in there. They've got a few machines. And I sort of walked in and it was like, oh, okay. And they've got no parts. They've got no parts. They got rid of, they used to buy from Philipson's and they'd stopped buying from Philipson's. So there was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure to get.
Interesting
not only the
being because to a certain extent you've got the freedom to create what you think they need. In a situation like that, you really need them to trust you and give you a blank slate and say, do what you think. Is that what happened?
Yeah, that really is. I mean, credit to Nigel Beaumont. That's what he did. He just basically said, this is what we need, and we need you to do it. So I called in a couple of guys that I'd worked with before. One of the guys came from Holland and Holland that I knew, and there was somebody else that we called in. So there was three of us, and I basically did all the CAD design, drawing stuff with the Gunmaker. So it was great there because you could walk out onto the shop floor, and if you were doing an over and under lock, then you'd say to Keith Ackerman, who was the lock maker, Keith, can you come and spare me a couple of hours in the office? And he'd come and sit down. We'd have a cup of coffee, and I'd show him what we were doing, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, well if you do this and that'll make things easier. Can you do that?" So you go, "Yeah, I can do that." And they're like, "Oh, okay, all right." So they felt a part of the design process, and you kind of soon realised who was up for change and who wasn't, because some were very sceptical of it all. And I think some didn't want it to work. Some people did not want it to work. But most on the whole, they were keen to do it. And you also learned quickly who were the people that they knew what they were doing. And it wasn't always the older guys. I mentioned Keith Ackerman. He was a guy around about the same age as me, so in his 30s. But you just knew that he was something a little bit special about him. He was quite smart. So you were asking him questions and he knew what you were talking about straight away. And it was like, yeah, let's do that. And then they could see the parts being made, so we programmed them. I'd got some ideas, a bit of a mismatch really, of what I'd learned with John Shirley and what I'd picked up at Holland and Holland, because I picked up some, and I tried things different ways there. So we sort of amalgamated it, and we were producing parts. At the time, they were good parts. They could have been better, but there wasn't the time to do it. They were desperate to get the guns made. So it was a balancing act between getting the parts off the machine to a standard, but we always tried to improve. And we went through all the model range. So we made all the Woodward stuff because that's what they were struggling with. Woodward ejector work, stuff like that. They couldn't make it. And we cut the times on the ejector work. The ejector work on the Woodward was their limiting factor. They couldn't make any more than, say, 15 guns a year because they only had one ejector man and he couldn't do any more than that. Yeah. So again, we worked with the ejector man and we got rid of all the forgings and everything, and then we started making it all from solid. And we cut the times, on the ejector work. It got slashed from kind of something like 200 hours to about 50.
So that enabled them to move from 15 guns a year to what, double that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, quadrupled, and then at that point, Workman was in charge of the production, and his aim was to get as many guns out as they could. And I believe in those years we were doing 100 guns, 100 real guns a year were going out the door, best guns, which was quite impressive because we were only a small machine shop. We'd only got 3 people in there. I was doing the design and the programming and some of the machining, and then I had 2 guys that were helping me out. So it was quite small.
That's very impressive from a business point of view, because if suddenly you can push your production up from 15 guns a year to 30 or 45 or 100, that's without employing lots more people. That's really got you through a bottleneck.
It did, and also it was all done in house, which was important because up to that point, Purdy's were buying parts from anywhere they could. I mean, they were buying locks in from York and Walling if they could get them. So customers used to come round and they say, "Oh, how's it changed?" Well, now it's all made in house, and it wasn't before. So it genuinely was all made in house. The only thing Purdy's would buy in was the barrel tubes. They didn't have a facility like Holland and Holland to make tubes. So Purdy's was still buying in from Chris Kay and other places. But apart from that, everything was made at Felgate Mews.
Yeah. And how long did you stay at Purdy?
I was there far longer than I thought it ever would be. So I stayed at Purdy's for around about 14 years. And I saw the factory changed dramatically over those 14 years. And some of it was good and some of it not so good. When I first started, it was a very small group of people. As I say, Ed Workman was in charge of the production, and we had some outworkers. And then, like a lot of these companies, they grow, and you get more and more people in the offices, and it wasn't really. I couldn't really see where it was going, to be quite honest. And by that time, because I was travelling into London, and I was actually living in Lincolnshire at that time. So I was travelling in 2 hours a day to get there and back. And I thought to myself, I couldn't really see myself doing it for too much longer. I didn't really want to do. I liked the job, and a couple of things had happened. One being the children had grown up and flown the nest. And a few people had said to me outside in the trade, because I knew a lot of people in the trade, they'd said about doing it for myself. Would you set up on your own? And I'm like, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. I don't really know that I want to go down that road. And something happened, and I was given an opportunity. And then a friend of mine said that he'd got some space on a farm, and he would gladly let me use it. And I spoke to my wife about it, and she said, well, just give it a go, So that's pretty much what we did. We went to talk to the bank, and they said, we'll lend you some money, an extortionate interest rate, of course, and you put your house up as collateral and all those sorts of things. But we did it, and we bought some machinery, and we bought good machinery. We bought brand new machinery because I was figuring that I was in this for the long haul. I'd got customers. I knew there were customers. I knew there were people that wanted stuff made, from action sets to spares to V springs, even things like broken tumblers and stuff like that. There's a market for this stuff. So we set the business up, and quite frankly, I've never looked back. I've never had time to look back. And we expanded the business. We bought more machinery. We had another unit, and the works changed because we're now working with different people. I was lucky enough to get involved with Mark Newton at Rigby's right from the start. Mark approached me and said, would I be interested in doing the work on their Rising Bite rifles? And again, I just thought, well, what a great opportunity to get involved with not only a young up-and-coming company, but the work, the Rigby Rising Bite rifle.
It was a very interesting project. How did you go about reverse engineering that and creating the modern version of it?
Well, Mark had got a rifle that he liked. It was an older Rigby rifle. It wasn't the caliber that he wanted, but it was a nice.
Was it?
Yeah, it was an old 450. Yeah, and he said, "Well, yeah, but we want 470, 500." So I said, "Okay." So I'd been lucky enough to purchase a 3D scanning machine, a Renishaw reverse engineering machine, right at the start. So I purchased that because I knew I'd need that. And Mark gave me the rifle, and he was really good. He just said, "That's what we want. Can you make us the 500 and the 470?" So I said, "Yeah." So we reverse engineered the gun or the rifle, but it wasn't the right size. It wasn't what we wanted. So then we imported it into the CAD, and then we did some playing around with sizes. I'd cut some models out and then take them down to London and then talk to Mark. Mark's obviously super enthusiastic. I mean, a new company, young, and he was just like, "Yeah, fantastic, great. Let's make a few changes here." So we did the prototype, and it went through proof, and they then had got plenty of other orders. So we just kept trying to improve it, but it was a complicated thing to make.
It is a complicated action, isn't it? There's a lot going on there in the lockup and the.
Yeah, when you first look at that rifle, you think, "Oh, that's straightforward. It's no different to a Purdey, or it's no different to a Holland." And then you start taking it apart, and you see how the rising bite works, and everything with the spindle and how it operates the bolt to do this. And you look at it and you think, "Oh, okay, that's quite challenging, actually, even on the machinery that I've got with the experience that I've got." It wasn't easy to do. And the ejector work's it's like anything with the ejector work. It's easy when you know how, but I'd never seen that ejector work before. It's only really used on a Rigby. I've never seen it on anything else. It's not like a Southgate or a Purdey type system. So we had to learn, in order to make anything, you have to understand how it works. So you can't make the Rigby ejector work unless you understand how it works. And I'll be honest, that took me a little while to get my head around how that did work. But the Rigby guys were great. They took it on board, and they put the first one together. So I suppose on a time frame, it probably took us about a year, really, from reverse engineering to making the parts, to prototyping it, and to getting it built, and then, of course, through proof, which is, the thing that we all worry about. But it went through proof. Mark was happy.
And when you came to scaling up the action for larger calibers, I take it it's more complex than simply getting on your machine and going +3% or +5% on everything.
Yeah, that's interesting you should say that, because when we did going back to when I was at Purdey's, we made the little 410 over and under, which is a true scale 410. A lot of people thought that's how you do it. You just press scale and it zooms it down. But they're actually right. That is what you do. But that gives you the basic external parameters. And you're working with a pair of barrels, so obviously that's where all your datums are coming from. You can scale it down, but there's a lot of things on a gun that you don't want to get scaled by 20%. But you don't want some of the internals scaled by 20%, they'll break. So you then have to go over everything and start engineering it to work out, will the hand of the gun, will the stock break? You don't want that. It's got to be usable. So the percentage scaling is a starting point. You press the button, you scale it, and you go, "Does that look right?" Yeah, it does. It looks right. Because a lot of this stuff's done by eye. Even though we've got a computer, we're still looking at things. So we scaled, when we came to scale up the Rigby rifle, which is actually what we did. We went from a 470-500, we scaled up to the 577-600. It was very much, we had the barrels, so we had the centers, and then we scaled up. I think off the top of my head, it was about 12.5%, which gave me externals. I'd already got the stocking sizes that I wanted because I'd learned that over the years with talking to the stockers, people like Richard Bailey and stuff, Purdey's. They'll tell you, where do you want to be with a 600, width of hand, depth, etc. So we've got those sizes. So it's basically working from barrels, from stock in the middle. And of course, you've got a weight issue, with a 577 and a 600. Nobody wants that thing too light. So there's a weight. And funny enough, Mark Newton actually wanted the 577 a lot lighter than I thought he would. But I think it was quite daring of him actually to do that. But looking back on it now, he got it spot on. When we did the 577, I scaled it down a little bit more than I probably would have done. And it's actually turned out a beautiful rifle. And they tell me, I haven't shot it, but they tell me it's a beautiful thing to handle. Of course, when you go up to the 600, well, that's a different thing again. I mean, again, you really want some weight in that thing. No. But again, the Rigby gives you the opportunity. It's a strong action. I think it's one of the strongest actions out there. I think the Rigby action is super strong in its design. So you can afford to adjust a few things and maybe think of the aesthetics of it a little bit more. Some people make a 600 and it really does look like a brick. It's just a brick. It's not attractive. And if you look at the Rigbys, they are attractive things. It's the design of it. So you've got to look at the design, and I think there is possibly talk about going one step further than the 600, but you'd have to ask Mark Newton about that.
Yeah,
that'll be interesting.
There's always somebody that wants a bigger one than somebody else.
Yeah, and then of course, after we did the rifles, then we got involved with the shotguns.
Yeah.
So we did a 12 gauge rising bite shotgun, which again was something completely new there because it was a shotgun.
I was lucky enough to be the first person filmed shooting that gun.
Yeah, and
we went to the playground at West London, and to great fanfare, they fired a play over my head, and of course, I missed.
Yeah, I mean, that's a super light gun. Super light.
It's a very nice gun, actually. Once I got the hang of it, I was breaking very high clays, very, very comfortably, and it was. And then when we moved to the partridge or the average pheasant stand, and they were just firing clays out left, right, and centre. It's very manoeuvrable, very reactive, and as you say, very strong. You feel no felt flexing in the action or any of the problems that you sometimes get with light guns. It always felt like it was holding itself together very, very solidly.
Yeah, I was quite shocked with 12 bore. Basically, again, Mark had a 12 bore. We looked at it. We thought, well, we need to change a few things to bring it into the modern world. But it was really a straightforward copy. We got the sizes, the stock measurements worked, everything. I just looked at it and I thought, why change it? It's there. It's beautiful. When we scaled down to the 28 gauge, which is what we've been doing recently, and I think the first couple are actioned and going to the proof house very soon. That was a lot harder because you'd made this 12 gauge that was super small, super light, beautiful looking. So we couldn't make a 28 gauge that was like a brick. So we really had to think, what could we do? It's got to be nice, it's got to be beautiful, it's got to be functional. You've got to think about what somebody's going to shoot with it. And the scaling was a lot harder on that.
Well, with the 28 bore these days, of course, people don't use their 28 bores like the Victorians use their 28 bores. They all want to put much heavier cartridges down them, and they want them to be full-size adult guns now, don't they? Rather than
you have to be mindful what that customer's going to. But then we beefed it up in the place where we thought needs to be beefed up. Mindful again of the weight. Peter Higgins made the barrels, and they were super light, really nice barrels. You have to think about the balance, obviously. The one big problem with the 28 bore was the lock work, because we got quite a nice scale lock on the 12 bore, but when we came to do the 28 bore, that lock was going to be too big, and scaling locks is really quite a complicated affair, because it still has to, everything has to work. It's a lot smaller, but it still wants a good blow.
Yeah, I'm reminded of some of those sort of World War One era Purdey small bores on the Beasley action, where you've got a small gun, but you'd almost got a full-size lock on it.
Yeah. So again, something I learned when I was at Purdey's, I spent a lot of time talking to Richard Bailey, stocker, and he would always say to me, you don't want that big lock on there. You don't want to be cutting out all the wood. Think of the strength, So what we did with the Rigby was we took the 12-bore lock, and then we scaled it down. I think I scaled it about 25% to start with. And Nick Coggan, the actioner at Rigby's, who's in charge of design as well, he came up and we spent quite a lot of time in front of the computer looking at it. And I think he thought it was a bit small, but he'd been aware of the woodward over and under that I'd done at Purdey's. In fact, Nick had worked at Purdey's with me for a time. So he knew that it would work. And he just said, well, if you think it's going to work. So anyway, we made a prototype, and actually it came out really well. It was a beautiful scale lock. And I think sometimes you've got to just push the boundaries a little bit with that sort of stuff, because then when it's stopped, you don't want to be cutting all that wood away through the hand. You've got to be really mindful of that. You've got a lot less wood in there. The last thing you want to do is to either leave the thing looking like a big lump, or take it so small as soon as the customer goes out and uses it, because like you quite rightly said, some people are using these 28 bores and they're really working these guns. So you've got to try and balance it all up. I'm happy with the 28 bore. I think when it comes out, when it's finished, probably be later on in the year, I think it'll sit nicely to the side of the 12 bore, and I think people will see it's a true scale lock. But it's always harder coming down in scale, because you've got less room to use. You've got to be thinking about the stock all the time, all the while the wood. If you don't leave yourself enough wood in the metalwork, then you're going to put the breech pin in. There's nothing there, These are the things you learn along the way by talking to these craftsmen. I've been lucky. I've been very, very lucky that over the years, I've worked with the best. I've worked with them all. Peter Nelson, John Keane, all these people that have got a wealth of experience. And on the whole, they're happy to share that knowledge with you, that they will tell you.
I think from an end user's point of view as well, it's going to be very interesting for people to hear all this, because what I'm getting from it is that it's very much not a them and us kind of environment with the gun making and the engineering side of it. I mean, it sounds like every step of the way, as an engineer, you've had the gun makers there talking with you through everything. So you've very much become a key part of the gun making process. You're not just an engineer that comes in and prompts a load of parts and says, there you go, get on with it. You've actually, in order to create these things, there've been gun makers at your elbow every step of the way.
It's got to be. It has to be like that. You have to understand what these guys want. We, in the trade, at this end of the trade, we're making bespoke guns. That's what they are. They're still bespoke. Whether they're Rigby 12 bore, whether it's a Woodward over and under or a Beasley sub, they're all slightly different size barrels and different this. We're not in a production environment. We're not making Berettas or Brownings. It's not what we do. And so you listen to the guys, and you can get a lot of information. Of course, some people have got ideas, and you sort of go away and you think, well, that's not moving things forward. So you maybe tease it a little bit more and do a little bit more. And generally, in my experience, nobody will ever say, oh, you've done too much for me there. You've done too much for me. I mean, of course, if you take parts too close, which you can do, And so say if somebody's regulating a lock and you've not left enough on the bend on the tumbler, or they'll say, "Oh, Ian, there's not enough to regulate it. I can't get my overcock," or something like that. But that's all experience. That's what you learn going to. And sometimes you find that some people might ask you for something, and you think, "I'm not really sure you understand that. That could be a little bit too close. And I don't want to be remaking this, so I might leave a little bit on, use my judgment, and 9 times out of 10 they'll come back and say, "Yeah, you were right." But yeah, so I've been lucky. I've worked with the best. We are very fortunate in our trade.
And you are very much at the heart of the gun trade now. I dread to think, really, in practical terms, where most of our big firms would be without the kind of thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I think I was quite surprised when I set the company up. We thought we'd be doing all new kits and parts, which we do, and we work closely with Rigby. But we also do a lot of repair stuff, and we supply mainspring blanks, say for a Purdey side by side, and people couldn't get those, and and of course the gun's been made for 140, 150 years, whatever it is. So of course it's changed over the years. So it's trying to come up with a blank that will fit a gun from 1850 or a gun from 2015. Yeah. Not that the spring should have broken then, but it could do, or they could have lost it or something like that. And so it's, again, working with the gunsmiths, because I work with, some little gunsmiths up and down the country. And they'll say to me, "Oh, have you got a blank that will fit that?" I'll say, "Yeah, I have. I've got that on the shelf. I'll put it in the post tomorrow and you'll have it." And, they'll have to do a little bit of filing on it, but they'll get it in. And I suppose, really, where else would they go to get that?
I mean, component parts and supplies of all the raw materials and the basic ingredients for gun making, for want of a better word, bits of metal and bits of wood and tubes and all these sorts of things. In recent years, they've been the things that people have really struggled to get. As you say, people like York and Wallin and Philipsons and all the suppliers to the trade that the Victorians relied on, that's essentially all falling down to you now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that will be making one gun. So if you put it in perspective, say you've got Rigby's that are making multiple guns, and then you've got people like Alex Torrock at Smith & Torrock, who's making maybe 2 or 3 guns a year. And so they'll want a Woodward maybe, or something else. People like Richard Barnes, all these little individual people, they can't go to a big engineering shop and say, "Oh, I've designed a load of drawings, can you make me one?" It's not going to happen. So we keep a lot of stuff on the shelf. It might just be part made, it might be something, and they'll say, "Oh, okay, well, I can work with that." Mm-hmm. So I'll have that at that stage. I'll gladly take it and I'll finish it to how I want it. They're only doing 1 gun or 2 guns, so but then to be able to say to somebody, "Oh, I can supply you the lot for that," so I can supply all the parts with the spring, all heat treated and everything, and "Oh, that's great," because York and Wallin, I don't think they do much anymore. I think they do a couple of, there's some repair stuff, but basically you can't just go out and buy a complete set of lock parts anymore, unless you're going to put your hand.
And what seems to be happening now, I think, in what the future seems to hold with the kind of work that you're doing, is that smallish concerns now have the opportunity to come along with a project, with an idea, and what you're supplying enables them to make relatively small numbers, but make that project real in a way that, in the old days it was impossible. They were having to scratch around to find bits of old actions here and bits of donor gun here, and scratch around to make cobbled together guns out of available parts. Whereas now somebody can design a gun or come along to you with a style of gun they want to build and say, "Look, I want to build 20 of these over the next 5 years. Can you help?" And you can.
Yeah, that's right. You can, we've got the 3D scanner, so we can reverse engineer. So if they've got a lock shape or something on the plate that's the shape I want, so you can scan that for them and you can reproduce it exactly. If they've got certain other sort of variants and this is what we need to keep, that's our USP or whatever it is. So yeah, I can do that. And yeah, you can help out. It's about some of the smaller people as well. Of course, the full kits of parts are really what makes the company tick, from the design through to the manufacture. And even whether it's 2 or 3 off, 10 off is a lot for us. We don't generally get involved in anything above 10 off of anything. But some of it goes down to 1s and 2s. And then we try and keep a lot of parts on the shelf. And they go throughout the world as well.
And what are the economies of scale here? So if somebody comes along to you and says, look, I want to build, I've just set up on my own and I want to build my version of the box lock or my version of a side lock, whether it be something they've found historically, they want you to copy and perhaps adapt slightly. Moving from building them 1 to building them, say, 5 or 10, does the economy of scale really make a difference, or is it now getting to the point where you can almost do one-offs because the machinery is that quick?
I think one-offs are always problematic because it's not so much the machine time, but you've got to design it, you've got to program it. I always say the minimum really you want to get involved with is 3. 10 would be a lot, because people seem to think that, if I order 10, then it's better for you. I can get them cheaper. No, you're just clogging up my machines. I don't really want 10. Some of them. But minimum 3. But of course, with stuff like, we do have some really quite bespoke things that we do. And you understand that somebody doesn't want 3. They might do 2, a pair. We're lucky, aren't we, in the trade, that it's a pair of guns quite often. So you do 2, and some customers will bring you some work that's good work and ongoing, and then they'll say, I want a couple of these, and you think, I don't really want to do this, but you are a good customer and I understand, so we do it. And then sometimes those projects are the ones that turn out that you do 2, and then they'll pick the phone up and say, those 2 you did, well, we just sold another 5. Like, okay, so it can be like that. So, but for me, it's all about the interest, still being interested by the job, and I never really wanted to mass produce anything. I like what I do. I like the design stage.
What do you think? You've seen this stuff really develop from the 1980s right up until now. What do you see in the future? What do you think you'll be able to do in the future that you can't do now? Or how do you think the future will change in terms of what's possible or how things are done?
Well, CNC machinery has evolved to a stage it's at now, with CAD/CAM and stuff like that. But you have got to remember that it is still cutting a piece of metal. Now, that really is never going to change. What it's actually doing is cutting a piece of metal. So the technology will carry on and improving, and we should always move with technology. We have to embrace it. If we don't embrace it, we'll get left behind. So we embrace technology and we move along with it. But our trade is, we still exist because we make a bespoke product. And people want that bespokeness, so they want the 1-off, the 2-off, the special shape. And we must always be mindful of that. If we go down the road of producing Brownings or Parazzis, not that there's anything wrong with them, they are fantastic guns, but it's not what we do. There are lots of other people out there that do that more efficiently than we could ever do it. And that's whether you're Boss and Co, Holland and Holland, Purdey's, Rigby's. We must be mindful, and we must look at the technology and see how it's going to help us to produce new models. That's the way I see it. New things. And maybe some of the new things are actually looking back to the past, like maybe making hammer guns and stuff like that, which I've done in the past, and I did at Purdey's. So sometimes you look back to look forward.
Mm-hmm.
But how will it change? Well, I think it will keep evolving. There will be maybe other people doing stuff on it with new technologies, and we see 3D printers, which you hear it on the news, how somebody's downloaded a pistol and made it work on this 3D printer. But 3D printing and stuff like that is something that we should all look at, because it could be good for prototyping. I don't use that sort of technology, but I think things like that will help us out with rapid prototyping in the future. Companies like Rigby's are a young company, are an old company, but they've got lots of ideas, and so I think it will evolve over the next 10, 20 years like it has. But I think when you look back to when I started in the gun trade in the late 80s, early 90s, it was moving on. It had come from really quite archaic ways, and it moved rapidly. In the space of 5 years. It jumped to CNC machinery. Holland and Holland had got the machinery. Really had moved on. And I don't think we'll see those big, massive jumps. I think we're on a steady plateau now of moving along with technology.
Well, Ian, we've really come to the end of our allotted time. I could talk to you for a lot longer, but before you go, are you a shooting man yourself?
No, I'm not actually. I'm fascinated by guns, and of course I do shoot them, because customers will come along and they'll say, just feel this gun, and you pick it up and you feel the balance. Yeah, let's go, and because we're on the farm, so they go, let's go and shoot some, some clays or something, and I'll pick the gun up and I'll shoot a couple of clays, but that's me. I'm kind of done with it. I love them.
A lot of gun makers don't shoot. When I first got involved in the trade, I was surprised how many gun makers really have no interest in shooting. They've got their special area that they work on, but going out and shooting things, it just isn't in their interest. They've got other interests like fishing or racing cars.
I think a lot of the gun makers I know, most of us like watches and things like that. That's an engineering type thing. People fish, but no, I don't shoot. I do enjoy shooting, some clays and stuff. I like, especially if a customer brings a gun down that I've been involved with. I mean, as with Rigby's or say Alex Torok, Smith and Torok, they'll bring a gun down and have a shoot. Now that's exciting. Yeah, great. But no, I don't shoot.
Well, Ian, thank you so much. I'm sure you want to go and have your supper now, and spell mine cooking.
No problem, Nick.
I really appreciate you joining us. That's been a fascinating conversation. I've learned a lot this evening, and I'm sure viewers will also. And I think people, from listening to what you've had to say, will really have a much better understanding of how operations like yours are really at the heart of the modern gun trade.
Yeah. Well, it was my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
And you, Diggory.